The morning mist clung to Nelly's Air Force Base like a shroud, but nothing could hide the impossible truth sprawled across the firing range computer screens. 27 miles. The number blinked in electronic mockery of everything General Marcus Blackwood thought he knew about aerial combat. In 34 years of military service, through 3 wars and countless classified operations, he had never seen a missile strike at that distance. The previous range record stood at 19 miles, set by Major Iceman Rodriguez in 2019, a shot that had earned him a Bronze Star and legendary status among fighter pilots worldwide. The targeting computer had to be malfunctioning. Had to be. Blackwood's weathered fingers drummed against the observation deck's metal railing as he stared at the smoldering target drone, a twisted skeleton of titanium and carbon fiber scattered across the Nevada desert like mechanical bones. The shot had been fired from an F-35 Lightning II, call sign Raven 7, piloted by the newest addition to their elite squadron, a transfer from overseas operations whose personnel file read like a bureaucratic fever dream. Lieutenant Commander Zara Mirage Voss, 28 years old, born in rural Montana to a family of wheat farmers. No military lineage, no academy pedigree, no connections that mattered. Her records showed competency ratings that barely scraped above average flight hours that qualified her as experienced but not exceptional, and a psychological profile that suggested she was quiet, methodical, and prone to overthinking. The kind of pilot who followed protocols to the letter and never took risks that weren't calculated 3 times over. Blackwood had accepted her transfer request as a favor to Admiral Chen, expecting to babysit another bureaucratic placement until her inevitable reassignment to cargo runs or training duties. The military was full of adequate pilots who flew adequate missions and retired with adequate pensions. He'd assumed Mirage would join their ranks within 6 months, filing reports and flying practice runs, while the real warriors handled the serious operations. The radio crackled to life, shattering his contemplation. "Tower, this is Raven 7 requesting permission to land. Mission parameters completed, returning to base." Her voice carried no excitement, no pride, no acknowledgement that she had just rewritten the laws of physics as they understood them. Just the same calm, professional tone she'd used during every communication since arriving at Nelly's 3 weeks ago. Below on the tarmac, ground crews scrambled to position equipment as the F-35 approached, its angular silhouette cutting through the desert heat like a blade through silk. Blackwood watched the aircraft's controlled descent, noting the textbook precision of every adjustment, every micro-correction that brought the $30 million weapon safely home. Perfect technique, flawless execution. Absolutely unremarkable in every way, except for the impossibility of what had just occurred 27 miles away in the wasteland. The F-35 touched down with barely a whisper, its advanced landing systems absorbing the impact with mechanical grace. As the canopy lifted and steam rose from the superheated engine intakes, Blackwood caught his first clear glimpse of the pilot who had just shattered their understanding of air-to-air combat capabilities. Mirage climbed down with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else, her helmet tucked under one arm, sweat-dampened hair pulled back in a regulation bun. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, another competent but unremarkable pilot in a sky full of them, which made the smoking wreckage 27 miles away feel like evidence of either divine intervention or elaborate fraud. Blackwood's gut, honed by decades of combat experience, told him it was neither. Something else entirely was walking across his tarmac, and he had no idea what to make of her. The debriefing room felt smaller than usual as Mirage entered, her flight suit still bearing the creases and salt stains of aerial combat. She moved with the economical grace of someone who had learned that every motion should serve a purpose, that wasted energy could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Blackwood studied her face as she settled into the metal chair across from his desk, searching for any crack in the professional composure that might explain the morning's impossibility. "Lieutenant Commander Voss," he began, his voice carrying the weight of command earned through blood and sacrifice, "I need you to walk me through that shot, step by step, leave nothing out." Mirage nodded once, her dark eyes meeting his without flinch or hesitation. At 8:47 hours, I achieved target lock on the drone at maximum sensor range. Environmental conditions were optimal, clear visibility, minimal wind shear, standard atmospheric pressure. The target was maintaining course heading 270 at 400 knots, altitude 12,000 feet. Her recitation sounded like every debriefing he'd ever heard, clinical and precise. But the numbers didn't add up. Maximum effective range for the AIM-120 AMRAAM missile was approximately 25 miles under perfect conditions, and that assumed a head-on engagement with optimal targeting data. The drone had been flying perpendicular to her position, presenting the most challenging firing solution possible. "You're telling me you fired on a lateral target at maximum range in a training exercise?" Blackwood's tone carried skeptical authority that had broken more than one pilot's fabricated story over the years. "Negative, sir." Mirage's response came without hesitation. "I fired beyond maximum range. The targeting computer indicated a 3.7% probability of successful engagement. I assessed the probability as acceptable given mission parameters." 3.7%. Any rational pilot would have maneuvered for a better firing position, waited for optimal conditions, followed doctrine that had been refined through decades of aerial warfare. Instead, she had pulled the trigger on a shot that should have sent a $250,000 missile uselessly into empty desert while the target escaped unharmed. "What made you think that shot was worth taking?" Blackwood leaned forward, genuinely curious now rather than skeptical. For the first time since entering the room, Mirage hesitated. Her fingers traced the edge of the debriefing folder with unconscious precision, the same methodical attention to detail that apparently extended to impossible missile shots. When she finally spoke, her voice carried something deeper than professional competency. "In Afghanistan, we learned that sometimes the shot you don't take is the one that costs lives. The calculation said 3.7% chance of success, but they didn't account for variables the computer couldn't measure." She paused, her gaze distant. "Wind patterns at altitude, thermal differentials the sensors missed, the way the target was flying, small adjustments that suggested the pilot was getting comfortable, predictable." Afghanistan. Her service record mentioned deployment to Bagram Air Base, but the details were classified above Blackwood's clearance level. Most pilot transfers came with enough operational history to fill a novel. Mirage's file read like a redacted government document, with more black bars than actual information. The intercom buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. "General Blackwood, Admiral Chen on line 3. He says it's urgent regarding the morning's exercise results." The timing felt deliberately orchestrated, as if someone had been monitoring their conversation and chosen this moment to intervene. Blackwood reached for the phone, his instincts screaming that Mirage was far more than the unremarkable pilot her records suggested. 27 miles. The number haunted him as he lifted the receiver, knowing that Admiral Chen's urgent call would somehow make this morning's impossibility even more complicated than it already appeared. Admiral Chen's voice crackled through the secure line with the urgency of a man who had spent sleepless nights wrestling with classified information that could reshape military doctrine. "Marcus, I need you to understand something about Lieutenant Commander Voss before this goes any further up the chain. Her transfer wasn't routine personnel movement." Blackwood watched Mirage through the glass partition as she waited in the adjacent room, her posture suggesting infinite patience rather than concern about the conversation determining her future. Something in her stillness reminded him of the moment before a predator strikes, not tense or coiled, but perfectly prepared for whatever came next. She's not just another pilot we're shuffling around to fill quotas, Chen continued. 3 months ago, Mirage was flying close air support missions in the Hindu Kush when her squadron encountered something that officially never happened. 6 F-35s went up against what intelligence classified as advanced aerial threats of unknown origin. Only 2 aircraft returned to base. The implications hit Blackwood like a physical blow. Unknown aerial threats meant enemy aircraft with capabilities that exceeded current military understanding. Chinese sixth-generation fighters, Russian prototype interceptors, or something worse that required classification levels beyond his clearance. Losing 4 aircraft in a single engagement represented either catastrophic tactical failure or enemy technology that outclassed American air superiority. Mirage was one of the 2 survivors. Chen's voice carried the weight of classified tragedies. Her wingman, Captain Sarah Morrison, sustained critical damage during the engagement. Mirage flew escort for 47 minutes through hostile airspace, while Morrison's aircraft lost altitude and systems function. She talked her through an emergency landing in terrain that should have killed them both. Through the glass, Blackwood observed Mirage's hands, steady, precise, showing no nervous habits or unconscious stress responses. The hands of someone who had guided a dying aircraft through mountains, while enemy fighters prowled overhead, calculating angles and distances that meant the difference between rescue and catastrophe. The shot records from that engagement were classified and sealed, Chen continued. But before the blackout, preliminary analysis showed Mirage engaging targets at ranges that shouldn't have been possible with conventional weapons. Long-range interceptions that broke every engagement doctrine we teach at the Academy. 27 miles suddenly felt less like an impossibility and more like a glimpse into classified capabilities that exceeded public understanding of military aviation. If Mirage had been testing experimental weapons or tactics in combat situations, her transfer to Nellis began to make sense, not as bureaucratic shuffling, but as strategic placement of a pilot whose skills had been proven under conditions too sensitive for normal channels. "What am I supposed to do with this information, Admiral?" Blackwood asked, though he already knew the answer would complicate his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. "Test her," Chen replied without hesitation. "Push her capabilities to their limits. Find out what she can really do when the parameters are removed and the gloves come off. Because if the intelligence reports are accurate, we're going to need pilots who can engage threats beyond our current understanding." The line went dead, leaving Blackwood staring at a pilot whose quiet competence suddenly represented possibilities that frightened and thrilled him in equal measure. Whatever had happened in the Hindu Kush had forged Mirage into something unprecedented, a weapon disguised as an unremarkable transfer who could rewrite the rules of aerial combat when circumstances demanded the impossible. He walked back toward the debriefing room, knowing that his next conversation with Mirage would determine whether she became the most valuable asset in his squadron or the most dangerous liability he'd ever commanded. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Nellis Air Force Base as Blackwood assembled his most experienced pilots in Hangar 7. Major Iceman Rodriguez stood near the F-22 Raptor that had earned him legendary status, his arms crossed with the casual confidence of a pilot who had never met an engagement he couldn't win. Captain Viper Thompson leaned against the wing of her F-16, methodically cleaning her helmet visor with the obsessive attention to detail that characterized elite aviators. Lieutenant Ghost Park, the youngest pilot in the squadron but already holder of 3 air-to-air victory confirmations, sat on a maintenance cart examining targeting data from the morning's exercise. They represented the finest combat pilots in the United States Air Force, men and women whose skills had been tested in actual combat and proven beyond question. Each had earned their place through years of training, combat experience, and demonstrated excellence under pressure that would break lesser pilots. They were the standard by which military aviation measured success. And according to this morning's impossible data, Mirage had just made them all look like student pilots on their first solo flight. "Gentlemen, ladies," Blackwood began, his voice carrying across the hangar with parade ground authority, "this morning's exercise produced results that challenge our understanding of air-to-air engagement capabilities. Lieutenant Commander Voss achieved target elimination at 27 miles, 8 miles beyond our previous range record." Iceman's expression shifted from casual interest to sharp attention. "Sir, are we talking about a malfunction in the targeting systems? Computer error that gave false readings?" "Negative. Triple-checked by ground control, confirmed by drone telemetry, verified by debris analysis. The shot was real, the distance was accurate, and the target was eliminated with a single missile at maximum deflection angle." Viper straightened from her casual lean, her competitive instincts triggering at the mention of records being broken. "With respect, General, maximum effective range for AMRAAM is 25 miles under perfect conditions. Head-on engagement, optimal weather, target cooperation. A lateral shot at 27 miles violates basic physics." Ghost looked up from his data tablet, his young face showing the analytical intensity that had earned him rapid promotion despite his age. "Unless she's using modified targeting algorithms or experimental munitions that aren't in the standard loadout specifications." Blackwood had considered both possibilities during his conversation with Admiral Chen, but neither explanation satisfied his growing certainty that Mirage represented something entirely outside normal military categories. Experimental weapons would require authorization levels that left paper trails. Modified algorithms would show up in post-flight data analysis. This shot had been accomplished with standard equipment following standard procedures, which made it either impossible or evidence of pilot capabilities that transcended conventional limitations. "I want each of you to fly against her," Blackwood announced, his decision crystallizing as he spoke. "Individual engagements, full instrumentation, maximum effort on both sides. Rules of engagement will be modified to allow extended-range shots and non-standard tactics. I want to see what Lieutenant Commander Voss can do when she's not holding back." The pilots exchanged glances that carried years of shared experience and mutual respect. They had flown together through combat deployments, training exercises, and competitive evaluations that forged bonds stronger than family. None of them enjoyed the prospect of being used to test an unknown pilot's capabilities, but orders were orders, and their curiosity about the morning's impossible shot outweighed their professional pride. "Sir," Iceman said carefully, "are we talking about standard BVR engagement rules, or is this some kind of experimental protocol?" Beyond visual range combat represented the pinnacle of modern air warfare, detecting, tracking, and eliminating threats at distances where human eyes couldn't distinguish between friendly and enemy aircraft. Success required perfect integration of pilot skill, aircraft systems, and tactical awareness that separated elite aviators from competent ones. If Mirage could consistently engage targets beyond conventional range, it would revolutionize every aspect of air-to-air combat doctrine. "Modified rules," Blackwood replied. "Extended engagement zones, experimental tactics authorized, full defensive measures permitted. I want to see capabilities, not adherence to training protocols." As the pilots dispersed to prepare their aircraft, Blackwood caught sight of Mirage walking across the tarmac toward her F-35. She moved with the same unhurried precision he'd observed earlier, showing no awareness that her career was about to be tested by some of the finest combat pilots in military service. Her confidence wasn't the swagger of an untested pilot or the bravado of someone trying to prove themselves. It was something else entirely, the quiet certainty of someone who had already faced the worst possible scenarios and found ways to prevail. The radio crackled as ground control began coordinating the afternoon's exercises, and Blackwood realized he was about to witness either the destruction of an overconfident pilot or the emergence of capabilities that would change everything he thought he knew about air combat. The desert sky stretched endlessly in all directions as Mirage's F-35 climbed toward the designated engagement zone, its Pratt& Whitney engine cutting through thin air with mechanical precision that masked the deadly intent of the aircraft's mission. Through her helmet-mounted display, she could see Iceman's F-22 Raptor approaching from the northeast, its stealth characteristics making it nearly invisible to conventional radar, but perfectly trackable through the advanced sensors that gave her aircraft its tactical advantage. Raven 7, this is Iceman 1. Rodriguez's voice carried the casual confidence of a pilot who had never lost an air-to-air engagement. Ready to show you how we do things at Nellie's. Hope you brought your A-game, rookie. Mirage's response came without emotional inflection, her voice as steady as if she were reading weather reports. Copy, Iceman 1. Weapons free, engagement commencing. 40,000 feet below, General Blackwood watched the radar displays in the control room as two of the most advanced fighter aircraft ever built began a deadly dance that would test the limits of both machines and pilots. The F-22's superior maneuverability gave Iceman advantages in close-range combat, while the F-35's advanced sensors provided Mirage with information superiority that could prove decisive in beyond-visual range engagements. The engagement began with both aircraft launching missiles simultaneously at maximum sensor range, their weapons streaking toward each other through the crystal-clear desert air like mechanical thunderbolts. Iceman's shot followed textbook doctrine, optimal firing solution, maximum probability of kill by the book execution that had earned him legendary status among fighter pilots worldwide. Mirage's missile flew a different trajectory entirely. Instead of the direct intercept course that training manuals recommended, her AMRAAM followed a complex flight path that curved through three-dimensional space like a predator stalking prey. The weapon's guidance system had been programmed with targeting data that seemed to anticipate where Iceman's aircraft would be rather than where it currently was, accounting for evasive maneuvers that hadn't yet been executed. Jesus Christ, whispered Captain Thompson from the control room, watching the missile tracks with growing amazement. She's firing at where he's going to be, not where he is. Iceman's defensive maneuvers were flawless. Sharp turns that pushed his aircraft to structural limits, chaff deployment that created false radar signatures, electronic countermeasures that should have spoofed any incoming weapon. His decades of combat experience translated into instinctive reactions that had kept him alive through 3 deployment cycles and countless training exercises. None of it mattered. Mirage's missile adjusted its flight path with each defensive maneuver, its guidance system apparently programmed with algorithms that predicted Iceman's reactions with supernatural accuracy. When he turned left, the weapon was already adjusting for the maneuver. When he deployed countermeasures, the missile ignored the false signatures and maintained lock on its primary target. The simulated explosion lit up radar screens as Iceman's aircraft registered a direct hit, ending the engagement with shocking finality. In less than 3 minutes, one of the Air Force's most experienced combat pilots had been eliminated by a rookie whose personnel file suggested she was barely qualified for routine patrol missions. Raven 7, Iceman 1, Rodriguez's voice carried stunned respect rather than his earlier casual confidence. That was exceptional flying, Lieutenant Commander. I've never seen targeting like that outside of theoretical studies. Mirage's response came with the same professional neutrality she'd maintained throughout the engagement. Copy, Iceman 1, RTB for debrief. As both aircraft turned toward Nellie's Air Force Base, Blackwood realized he had just witnessed something that would require classified briefings and strategic analysis beyond his clearance level. Mirage hadn't just won an engagement against one of their finest pilots. She had demonstrated capabilities that suggested military aviation had entered a new era of possibilities. The question was whether those possibilities represented opportunity or threat, and whether the quiet pilot now returning to base was their greatest asset or their most dangerous unknown. The debriefing room buzzed with tension as thick as desert heat, while Iceman sat across from Mirage, his usually confident demeanor replaced by the analytical intensity of a pilot trying to understand how 20 years of combat experience had been neutralized in less than 3 minutes. His hands moved unconsciously through the air, recreating the flight path that should have kept him alive, searching for the tactical error that had led to his elimination. "Walk me through your targeting solution," he said, his voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than wounded pride. "That missile flew like it knew where I was going before I did." Mirage studied the flight data displayed on the wall screen, her dark eyes tracking missile trajectories and aircraft movements with the precision of someone reading a familiar map. When she spoke, her voice carried the patient tone of an instructor explaining complex concepts to eager students. The F-22's defensive capabilities are well documented. Optimal turn radius, maximum G-force tolerance, standard countermeasure deployment patterns. Your aircraft's performance envelope creates predictable response options when faced with incoming threats. Iceman leaned forward, his competitive instincts engaging despite his recent defeat. "You're saying you fired based on statistical analysis of how Raptor pilots typically react?" "Negative." Mirage's response carried subtle correction. "I fired based on how you specifically react. Your flight patterns during the approach phase showed micro-adjustments that indicated preference for left-hand defensive turns. Your throttle control suggested comfort with high-G maneuvers. Your radar scanning pattern indicated confidence in your aircraft's stealth characteristics." The room fell silent as the implications of her analysis became clear. She hadn't been flying against the F-22 Raptor's technical specifications. She had been flying against Major Rodriguez's individual pilot characteristics, reading his behavioral patterns like a psychologist studying test subjects. General Blackwood watched from the observation deck as his most experienced pilot grappled with the realization that his flying style had been analyzed and countered by someone who had studied him for less than 5 minutes. The level of situational awareness required for such analysis went beyond exceptional piloting skills into territory that bordered on precognitive ability. "How many times have you watched me fly?" Iceman asked, searching for any logical explanation that might restore his understanding of air combat fundamentals. "This was our first engagement," Mirage replied with matter-of-fact precision. "But pilots develop consistent patterns over time: muscle memory, tactical preferences, response hierarchies. The human element becomes predictable when you know what to look for." Captain Viper Thompson entered the debriefing room with the swagger of a pilot eager to prove that Iceman's defeat had been a fluke rather than a demonstration of superior capability. Her F-16 Fighting Falcon might lack the advanced stealth characteristics of the F-22, but her aggressive flying style and intuitive tactical sense had earned her a reputation as one of the deadliest air-to-air combatants in the squadron. "My turn," she announced, her voice carrying competitive fire that had driven her to excel in every challenge throughout her military career. "Let's see how your computer brain handles someone who doesn't fly by the textbook." Mirage nodded once, her expression showing neither concern nor anticipation. "Understood. Ready when you are, Captain Thompson." As the pilots prepared for their second engagement of the day, Blackwood realized that Mirage's analytical capabilities represented something entirely outside normal military pilot categories. She wasn't just exceptionally skilled. She was operating with cognitive advantages that suggested training or experience beyond anything documented in her official records. The question was whether those advantages had been developed through classified programs that exceeded his clearance level, or whether Lieutenant Commander Zara Voss possessed natural abilities that military science hadn't yet learned to identify or replicate. Either possibility meant that the afternoon's second engagement would provide answers to questions that could reshape everything he thought he knew about air combat and the pilots who excelled at it. The sun hung low over the Nevada desert as Viper's F-16 screamed through the engagement zone with aggressive energy that perfectly matched her pilot's reputation for unconventional tactics. Unlike Iceman's methodical approach, Thompson flew with controlled chaos that made her nearly impossible to predict, sharp altitude changes that pushed her aircraft beyond normal operational parameters, seemingly random course corrections that served no apparent tactical purpose, and weapons deployment timing that violated every doctrine taught at flight school. She was, in short, exactly the kind of pilot that analytical targeting systems couldn't easily categorize. Raven 7, this is Viper 1, Thompson's voice crackled through the radio with predatory enthusiasm. Hope you're ready for something different than your boy Rodriguez. I don't fly by anybody's rules but my own. Mirage's F-35 maintained steady course and altitude as her sensors tracked the F-16's erratic flight pattern, her advanced targeting systems struggling to establish the predictive models that had made her first engagement so devastatingly effective. Thompson's seemingly random maneuvers created tactical complexity that challenged even the most sophisticated computer algorithms. Copy Viper 1, engaging now. The first exchange of missiles showcased the fundamental difference between methodical precision and intuitive aggression. Mirage's shot flew toward the calculated intercept point, where Thompson's aircraft should have been based on normal tactical analysis, while Viper's weapon followed a pursuit course that abandoned optimal energy management in favor of aggressive closing speed. Both weapons missed their intended targets. Thompson's laughter echoed through the radio as she threw her F-16 into a vertical climb that should have stalled the engine and sent her into an unrecoverable dive. Instead, the Fighting Falcon clawed through thin air with mechanical determination, its pilot pushing every system beyond design specifications in pursuit of tactical advantage. What's wrong, Mirage? Computer can't handle a little chaos. For the first time since arriving at Nellie's, Mirage's voice carried something other than professional neutrality. Not frustration or anger, but genuine interest, the tone of someone encountering a puzzle that required creative solution rather than analytical prediction. Negative Viper 1, adjusting parameters. What happened next would be analyzed in classified briefings for years to come. Instead of following conventional beyond visual range doctrine that emphasized sensor superiority and optimal firing solutions, Mirage dove her F-35 into close-range combat, where Thompson's aggressive instincts provided maximum advantage. The decision violated every tactical principle that governed F-35 employment, sacrificing her aircraft's technological superiority for direct confrontation in an environment where the F-16's maneuverability could prove decisive. General Blackwood watched the radar displays with growing amazement as both aircraft engaged in aerial combat that resembled nothing so much as a knife fight conducted at 500 miles per hour. Turn rates that approached structural limits, G-forces that pushed both pilots to the edge of consciousness, weapons deployment at ranges where defensive maneuvers became physically impossible. She's learning, Lieutenant Ghost Park observed from his position near the communication console. Look at her flight pattern evolution. First 3 minutes, she's trying to predict Thompson's maneuvers. Now she's responding to them in real time. The observation proved prophetic. Mirage's flying style underwent radical transformation as the engagement progressed, abandoning analytical prediction in favor of intuitive response that matched Thompson's aggressive energy. Her F-35 began flying like an extension of her pilot's consciousness, rather than a technological platform guided by computer algorithms. When the simulated missile impact registered on both radar screens simultaneously, the result represented something unprecedented in military aviation, a draw between two radically different approaches to air combat that had somehow achieved perfect tactical balance. Raven 7, Viper 1, Thompson's voice carried grudging respect rather than competitive mockery. That was the best close-range combat I've ever experienced. Where the hell did you learn to fly like that? Mirage's response came after a pause that suggested careful consideration of how much truth to reveal. Afghanistan taught me that survival requires adaptation. Sometimes the computer is wrong, and you have to trust something else. As both aircraft turned toward base, Blackwood realized that Lieutenant Commander Voss represented capabilities that transcended any single tactical category. Analytical precision when circumstances favored calculation, intuitive aggression when chaos demanded adaptation, and the wisdom to recognize which approach each situation required. The question was what other lessons Afghanistan had taught her, and whether those lessons had prepared her for challenges that exceeded anything her squadron might face in training exercises or conventional combat operations. The evening briefing room felt different as Lieutenant Ghost Park entered with the confident stride of a pilot whose youth masked exceptional tactical awareness and analytical capabilities that had earned him rapid promotion through squadron ranks. At 24, he represented the new generation of fighter pilots, technology-native aviators who had grown up with advanced flight systems and possessed intuitive understanding of modern air combat that often surpassed their more experienced colleagues. His approach to the upcoming engagement with Mirage would be entirely different from either Iceman's methodical precision or Viper's aggressive chaos. Ghost flew with mathematical precision that treated air combat as a series of equations to be solved through optimal application of physics, aerodynamics, and probability theory. He was, in many ways, the closest thing their squadron had to Mirage's analytical approach to tactical problems. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, settling into the briefing chair with casual respect, "I've been studying your engagement data from this afternoon. Your targeting algorithms show mathematical elegance that suggests advanced computational training. Where did you develop those capabilities?" Mirage studied the young pilot with the same analytical attention she had applied to his more experienced squadron mates, her dark eyes reading microexpressions and body language that revealed personality characteristics most people never consciously noticed. When she spoke, her voice carried genuine curiosity rather than professional deflection. "You fly like someone who treats physics as a language rather than a limitation. That's unusual for pilots with conventional training backgrounds." Ghost smiled with the confidence of someone whose intellectual capabilities had been recognized by an obviously superior analyst. MIT undergraduate, dual major in aerospace engineering and applied mathematics. I came to military aviation through ROTC rather than traditional pilot development programs. The revelation explained much about his flying style and tactical approach. While most military pilots learned air combat through repetitive training that built muscle memory and instinctive responses, Ghost had approached the discipline as an engineering problem that could be solved through mathematical optimization and computational analysis. "Engineering background provides advantages," Mirage acknowledged, "but actual combat requires adaptation beyond computational parameters. Mathematics can't account for variables that haven't been quantified." General Blackwood listened to their conversation through the monitoring system, recognizing that he was witnessing something unprecedented. Two analytically minded pilots discussing air combat theory with the precision of scientists examining experimental data. Their upcoming engagement would test whether mathematical perfection could overcome combat-proven adaptability. "That's what I want to test," Ghost replied. My aircraft systems can process tactical data faster than human consciousness. Real-time probability calculations, optimal firing solutions, predictive modeling for target behavior. If air combat is becoming a contest between computational capabilities, human limitations become tactical disadvantages. Mirage's expression shifted subtly, showing something that might have been sympathy or recognition. Computer systems are tools, Lieutenant. Very sophisticated tools, but still dependent on human judgment for strategic decisions. The moment you start trusting algorithms over instinct is the moment you become predictable. As both pilots prepared for their engagement, Blackwood realized he was about to witness a confrontation between two different philosophies of modern air combat: technological supremacy versus combat-proven adaptation, computational precision versus battlefield wisdom. Ghost represented the future of military aviation as envisioned by procurement officers and defense contractors, while Mirage embodied something that couldn't be programmed or purchased. The outcome would determine whether the Air Force's investment in advanced technology was creating better combat pilots or merely more sophisticated ways to lose air battles against opponents who understood warfare's human element. Either way, the engagement would provide answers to questions that would influence military aviation doctrine for decades to come. The twilight sky over Nevada transformed into a natural amphitheater as Ghost's F-16 Block 70 rose toward the engagement zone, its advanced APG-83 AESA radar scanning the airspace with electronic precision that could track multiple targets at ranges exceeding 100 miles. Unlike the earlier engagements, this confrontation would test whether computational supremacy could overcome combat experience and tactical adaptation. Ghost's aircraft represented the pinnacle of fourth-generation fighter technology: advanced sensors, sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities, and flight control systems that could execute maneuvers beyond human physical tolerance. Combined with his engineering background and mathematical approach to air combat, he possessed advantages that should have made him nearly invincible against any opponent flying conventional tactics. Raven 7, this is Ghost 1. Park's voice carried the calm confidence of someone who had calculated optimal solutions for every possible scenario, ready to demonstrate what happens when mathematics meets mythology. Mirage's F-35 maintained its standard approach pattern, showing none of the aggressive energy that had characterized her engagement with Viper or the methodical precision that had defined her confrontation with Iceman. If anything, her flying seemed almost casual, as if she were conducting a routine training flight rather than facing one of the squadron's most analytically gifted pilots. Copy Ghost 1, weapons free. The engagement began with both aircraft launching multiple missiles in rapid succession, creating a complex tactical environment where success required real-time analysis of multiple intercept trajectories while simultaneously planning defensive maneuvers and offensive counterattacks. Ghost's computational approach allowed him to process this information with machine-like efficiency, his targeting systems calculating optimal firing solutions faster than human consciousness could follow. His first 3 shots should have ended the engagement within 90 seconds. Instead, Mirage's F-35 began flying in patterns that seemed to violate basic principles of physics and mathematics. Her aircraft turned inside Ghost's missile tracking, accelerated through maneuvers that should have exceeded structural limits, and maintained offensive capability while executing defensive actions that appeared mutually exclusive. What the hell? Ghost's professional composure cracked as his carefully calculated shots missed their targets by margins that shouldn't have been possible given the precision of his targeting data. General Blackwood watched the radar displays with growing amazement as Mirage demonstrated flight capabilities that exceeded the documented performance envelope of her aircraft. Her F-35 was flying like a machine that had been freed from the constraints of engineering specifications and aerodynamic limitations. "She's not flying the airplane," observed Captain Thompson from her position near the communications console. "The airplane is flying itself and she's just directing it somehow." The observation proved remarkably accurate. Mirage's control inputs showed microsecond timing that exceeded human reaction capabilities, her aircraft responding to pilot commands before they were consciously formulated. The integration between pilot and machine had achieved symbiosis that transformed both into something greater than the sum of their individual capabilities. Ghost's mathematical approach began breaking down as his computational models failed to account for performance parameters that exceeded documented specifications. His targeting algorithms, designed to predict aircraft behavior based on known flight characteristics, couldn't adapt to an opponent whose capabilities operated outside normal engineering constraints. "Raven 7, how are you pulling those G-forces without losing consciousness?" Ghost's voice carried genuine scientific curiosity rather than tactical concern. Mirage's response came through gritted teeth, her voice showing strain for the first time during any of the day's engagements. "Training, conditioning, learning to work with the machine instead of fighting it." The engagement ended when Ghost's computational superiority finally overcame Mirage's physical limitations. His perfectly calculated shot achieved target lock at maximum deflection angle, eliminating her aircraft through mathematical precision that couldn't be countered by pilot skill alone. But the victory felt hollow as both pilots returned to base, knowing that Ghost had won through technological advantage rather than superior flying. More importantly, Mirage had demonstrated capabilities that suggested military aviation had entered territory where the boundaries between human and machine performance were